All right. So just kind of talking about, the last year, my project with Fujifilm GFX 100 came out, I guess, in February when they launched that camera with downhill skateboarders. So I'll just show you guys a few frames from some of the projects this year. This is pretty wild since I've never photographed this sport. These guys are flying down a road at 60 miles an hour or so. This was above Malibu, California. And we had police shutting down the road and all kinds of safety precautions and COVID officers and the whole dog and pony show just to like lock it down. But pretty fun to shoot with a new camera, which I've been shooting with for most of this year. And you've probably actually seen this image in a bunch of Fujifilm ads or on their website. It's been used around the world this past year to promote the camera. And from there, I've been doing a lot of skydiving work this year. I've worked with the RedBull Air Force, which is one of the most elite skydiving teams in the world for maybe the last 14 years. And so I had another big assignment with them, which I'm not physically here. It's a remote mounted camera that's shooting automatically. And then I have the pilot kind of flying around in different positions that we've discussed. This is a GoPro image. In fact, some of the best pictures I got on this whole assignment were from GoPros that were just shooting like 2 frames every second. And the problem with this is when you get back, you have like 25,000 pictures just on the GoPros alone that you got to go through. So it's kind of a workflow nightmare. But I mean, they repainted his wing and he had all these reflections. It was kind of endless, amazing pictures from the GoPro on the wing of the airplane upside down. So, and during this assignment, one of the 2 or 3 best helicopter pilots in the world told me to come up and sit left seat with him. And we did his entire aerobatic show where he goes upside down. So a 360 in a helicopter, which is physically not supposed to be possible, but because they have fixed rotor helicopters, meaning the rotor blades don't swivel, they can do, and they're the best helicopter pilots in the world. At first I was a little like, I don't want to throw up in your helicopter. And he's like, don't worry, I'll guide you through it. And we did, I don't know, a dozen or more backflips in his helicopter, just so you can see what that looks like. Here's kind of what it looks like. Pulling maybe 3 to 4 Gs, which is not too bad. It wasn't that wild. But some amazing stuff. And then just a few weeks later, I had this other skydiving assignment. And it's with an all-female skydiving team that travels around the country at all kinds of different events and stuff, skydiving. And they set up this wall of fire, and then it's called swooping. When they come into land, they're going about 60 miles an hour through this wall of fire, and it doesn't injure them. It's just like a blink of an eye through the flames. It doesn't hurt the parachute, just burns off little fibers on the edges of the cords. Which produced some pretty insane images. And I almost died like 3 seconds after this was taken because one of the skydivers, basically her feet came within like 4 inches of my head and she didn't line it up properly. And I didn't move, luckily, otherwise I would be in a coma right now or something. So a little bit of excitement there. Some other work for SanDisk earlier this year, shooting rock climbing in Red Rocks, one of my favorite climbing areas in the world. Integrating some flash with that as well, but just giving you guys kind of a tour. I have taught a few workshops in person this year, one in Montana and one in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And this is just a shot we had set up for that workshop. With some kayakers surfing this wave. This is actually in Montana. So I'm just giving you guys, this is kind of a wacky one. I've been shooting a fair bit for the New Mexico Tourism Bureau here, and they had me down in White Sands, New Mexico, photographing one of the people from the museum. There's a space museum there that works with NASA, and they have an actual real spacesuit. It's basically a new version of what Neil Armstrong wore on the moon. It doesn't have all the seals and stuff, but so we went around town and got all these wacky pictures of this guy in a spacesuit. These are kind of hilarious, for advertising. Come visit New Mexico and White Sands. But just some wacky stuff this year. There's more I could show, but just for the matter of time. And in terms of, workshops, we've got a couple coming up We're doing a storage like 1-day workshop this year, where we're going to take a deep dive into like how to back up your images, how to archive your images, how to be safe, how not to lose images, how to keep track of images, that kind of stuff. And we'll go into anything and everything you ever wanted to know about this. It's going to be a 2-session workshop on 1 day, probably about 5 hours total. And it's going to be a super deep dive on keeping track of your data and making sure you don't lose anything. So if that's something you need, that workshop's fairly affordable and will be a really good primer on that. This is maybe a much more confusing looking page, but just shows you my whole backup plan, this is at the end of the workshop, so don't worry, it doesn't start off this complicated, but just to give you an idea of how crazy you can get with backing up your stuff. The other workshop I have coming up is in probably about a month or so, a little over a month from now, is the digital workflow workshop. That is a 2-weekend workshop. It's 6 sessions. I think it's like 18 hours. It has, of course, some of that storage and backup stuff in it for one of the sessions or part of one of the sessions. But it's basically A to Z, starting with the camera, how to set up the camera, all the way through printing your images. It's kind of a comprehensive workshop. It's based off of my ebook. That's like a 600 or 700 page ebook. It's kind of like the Bible on workflow. So we'll talk about cameras. We'll talk about new cameras. We'll talk about, working up your images in Lightroom and or Capture One, depending on what you're using. We'll talk about printing images, just showing you my office, even though that printer is gone, as you can see in the background. So lots to cover there in that workshop.